Here's an expanded keynote 500 words. For the story, I thought he only wanted to mentor me, until I saw the way he looked at me. Hashtag keynote 1. The first impression when I first met him, I had no reason to suspect that our professional relationship would evolve into something more. In fact, I was more than eager to learn. Being a fresh graduate at a prestigious company, I was thrilled to have someone of his caliber take me under his wing. Mark Thompson, my mentor, was everything I admired in a professional. Accomplished, sharp, charismatic, and with an air of quiet authority that commanded respect without needing to demand it. At least, that's how it seemed at first. He was patient with me, guiding me through complex tasks, answering my questions, and encouraging my growth. But beyond his guidance, there was something else, something I couldn't quite place at first. It wasn't until a few weeks into our working relationship that I started to notice it. The subtle, almost imperceptible way he looked at me when I wasn't paying attention. In meetings, I could feel his eyes on me when I spoke. It wasn't just the casual, professional glance that you give someone when they're speaking. No, his gaze lingered longer than necessary, as if he was studying me, analyzing something deeper. It wasn't the kind of attention I was used to in the office. Most people, especially older colleagues, were polite but distant. They treated me like the new kid who was still learning the ropes. Mark, however, made me feel like he was really listening, as if he saw something in me, something beyond the surface. It started with little things. A soft smile after I'd present an idea in a meeting. A brief touch on the arm when he corrected something I'd said, more intimate than necessary. I could feel a strange warmth radiating from him in those moments, a kind of energy that was different from the way others interacted with me. But I couldn't allow myself to overthink it. After all, I was the new employee, and he was just being supportive, being a mentor. This was his job, right? However, as time went on, the line between professional and personal began to blur. It wasn't just in the office anymore. We would meet for coffee after work to discuss projects or talk about career development, which seemed innocent at first. But during those moments, I began to sense that there was something more beneath the surface of his words. He would ask about my life outside of work, my hobbies, my background, my dreams, and not in the way a mentor would typically inquire. It was almost as though he was interested in me, not just my career. The conversations felt personal, intimate even, and I found myself opening up to him in ways I hadn't expected. What really caught me off guard, however, was the way he made me feel. There were times when I'd catch him watching me, with a certain look in his eyes, a kind of hunger, but not the kind I was used to seeing from my peers or colleagues. It was more subdued, more intense. His gaze was steady, searching, and I couldn't shake the feeling that he was seeing something in me that I wasn't even fully aware of myself. It wasn't just the attention. It was how it made me feel, seen in a way that was both exhilarating and unsettling. I didn't know what to make of it. I'd always prided myself on my ability to maintain professional boundaries, but with Mark, I couldn't ignore the growing tension between us. The more I tried to push these feelings aside, the stronger they seemed to become. I couldn't deny it any longer. There was something more than mentorship going on here. But was it just my imagination? Or was Mark feeling the same pull I was? I wasn't sure, but I knew one thing for certain. Everything I thought I understood about our professional relationship was starting to unravel. And it left me wondering, what would happen if I acknowledged what was really happening between us? Here's an expanded keynote 500 words. For the story, I thought he only wanted to mentor me, until I saw the way he looked at me. Hashtag keynote 2. The moment of clarity, it happened on a Thursday afternoon, just a typical day at the office. I had been sitting at my desk, hunched over my computer, working on a proposal for an upcoming project. The usual hum of the office was in the background, punctuated by the occasional sound of footsteps or the ringing of phones. I wasn't expecting anything to disrupt the steady flow of the day. But then, Mark walked into my office. He hadn't scheduled any meeting with me that day, so I wasn't sure what brought him to my desk. As usual, he was impeccably dressed, tailored suit, perfectly knotted tie, his hair slightly tousled in that way that made him seem effortlessly put together. His presence alone was enough to make the room feel a little smaller, a little warmer. He walked up to my desk with that slow, purposeful stride, and as he reached me, he paused. "You've been working hard," he said, his voice warm, but there was something in the way he said it that made my stomach flutter. I looked up at him, feeling the weight of his gaze. His blue eyes were fixed on mine, and for a split second, it felt like the entire world had paused. I nodded, trying to keep my composure. "Just trying to finish up this proposal," I replied, keeping my tone professional. "It's been a long day." He smiled, a knowing, almost smug smile. "I can tell. You've been putting a lot of effort lately." "I admire that." I smiled back, a little self-consciously. "Thanks, Mark. It means a lot coming from you." He leaned in slightly, closer than he needed to, and I could feel his breath near my ear. My heart raced, but I forced myself to stay calm. He was just being supportive. Just a mentor, right? But when he said, "I've always been impressed with your drive," there was a distinct emphasis on the word always, and it made something stir inside me. There was a softness in his voice that I hadn't heard before, and the way his eyes lingered on me felt almost personal. I cleared my throat, trying to shake the feeling of his proximity. "I appreciate that." He didn't move away. Instead, he paused for a moment, studying me, and then he did something I wasn't prepared for. His hand, unexpectedly, brushed against mine as he leaned down to point at a part of my screen. The touch was brief, but it sent a jolt of electricity up my arm, making me shiver despite myself. My skin tingled from the brief contact. His fingers lingered for just a second longer than necessary, and I could have sworn he felt it too. I glanced up at him quickly, but his gaze was steady, almost too calm, as if nothing had happened. I swallowed hard, trying to push down the rising tide of emotions threatening to overwhelm me. "I'll have the draft ready by tomorrow morning," I said, my voice a little shakier than I intended. Mark nodded, his eyes never leaving mine. "I know you will. You're capable of more than you realize." His words were laced with something else now, something deeper, more intimate than before. And when he finally pulled back, I couldn't help but notice how he seemed to hesitate for just a moment before walking away. As he left, I felt an overwhelming sense of confusion. What had just happened? That simple moment, his hand brushing mine, his gaze lingering a little longer, the softness in his tone, was enough to shatter everything I thought I knew about our dynamic. In that instant, I realized what I had been ignoring for weeks. There was something more than mentorship between us, something that went beyond professional admiration or guidance. I had known it in my gut, but now it was undeniable. I sat there, staring at my screen, my thoughts racing. Did he feel it too? Was I just imagining it? Or had that touch, that moment, been a silent confession? The air in the office felt different now, heavier, charged with the unspoken words we hadn't said yet. It wasn't just a fleeting feeling anymore. It was real, and that terrified me. I had never felt more conflicted in my life. Mark had been nothing but professional up until that moment, but everything had shifted. The boundaries I had carefully placed between us now seemed impossible to maintain. And the worst part? I didn't know if I wanted to keep them in place. That evening, as I walked out of the office, I couldn't shake the image of his eyes, the way they had looked at me, the way they saw me, not just as a colleague or a mentee, but as something more, something he wanted. But what was I supposed to do with that? And more importantly, what was he going to do about it? Here's an expanded Keynote 3, 500 words, for the story. I thought he only wanted to mentor me, until I saw the way he looked at me. Hashtag, 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 Keynote 3. Crossing the line, the next few days were a blur of conflicting emotions. I couldn't stop thinking about the moment Mark and I shared. The way his hand brushed against mine. The way his eyes lingered longer than they should have. I kept telling myself that it was nothing. That it was just a moment of kindness, a friendly gesture, maybe even a mistake. After all, he was my mentor. He was supposed to be supportive, and maybe his proximity and compliments were just part of that. But deep down, I knew the truth that scared me, the truth that I was starting to feel something I shouldn't. It wasn't just admiration. It wasn't just respect. It was something deeper, something more dangerous. The next day, Mark asked me to stay after hours to go over the proposal I had been working on. It wasn't unusual. He had done this before. He had a way of challenging me, pushing me to do my best. But this time, as I walked into his office, I couldn't shake the feeling that the atmosphere had changed. The air was thicker, charged with an electricity that hadn't been there before. He stood by the window, his back to me, looking out over the city skyline. He looked thoughtful, but when I entered, he turned quickly, his eyes locking onto mine. I could feel the weight of his gaze as he studied me, and suddenly, the room felt too small, too intimate. "Glad you could make it," he said, his voice low, softer than usual. He motioned toward the desk where the proposal was laid out. "Let's go over it." I nodded, trying to keep things professional. I needed to focus. This was just a work meeting. That's all it was. But as I sat down next to him, I couldn't ignore the tension in the air. His presence was overwhelming. The subtle warmth of his body, so close to mine, the way his hand brushed against mine as he handed me the papers. It was all too much. I tried to focus on the proposal, but my thoughts kept drifting back to the way he had looked at me that day, the way he made me feel. It was like he could see straight through me, and that thought terrified me more than anything. Was it just me, or was there something more? I caught myself stealing glances at him, unsure of how to react. Was he aware of what he was doing? Was I just imagining it? Then it happened. As I was reading over the proposal, I felt his gaze on me again. This time, it wasn't just a quick glance. He was staring at me, intently. His eyes were soft, but there was something more there now. A hunger, a longing. I could feel the heat of his stare as it traveled across my face, and I couldn't breathe. I looked up, meeting his eyes, and for a moment, the world around us seemed to vanish. It was just the two of us in that room. He didn't say anything, but the silence between us was deafening. My heart pounded in my chest, and I felt a surge of warmth flood my face. I wanted to say something, but the words were stuck in my throat. What could I say? Stop looking at me like that? Or worse, I want you to look at me like that again. Finally, he broke the silence. "You're doing great," he said, his voice steady, but there was an underlying tension there, too. "But don't forget to take care of yourself along the way." I nodded, tried to regain some semblance of control over the situation. Of course, I won't forget, but inside I was reeling. I couldn't ignore the truth anymore. This wasn't just mentorship. It wasn't just about my career or my future. There was something deeper, something that went beyond the professional lines we had once set. Mark wasn't just my mentor anymore. He was someone else. Someone who made me feel things I didn't want to feel. Someone I couldn't resist, no matter how hard I tried. That night, I lay awake in bed, my mind spinning. I had crossed the line, and I wasn't sure I could ever go back. We both had. But the real question was, what happens now? Was it too late to pull back? Or had we already gone too far? Here's an expanded keynote for 500 words. For the story, I thought he only wanted to mentor me, until I saw the way he looked at me. ####, keynote 4. The unspoken words the day after our close encounter in his office. Mark was distant. It was subtle at first, the shift in his demeanor, but I noticed it immediately. He had always been professional, but now there was something more guarded in his behavior. He didn't look at me the same way anymore. There was no lingering gaze, no gentle touch, no private moments that made me feel as though I mattered more than just a mentee to him. It was as if he had taken a step back, putting up an invisible wall between us. I couldn't decide if I was relieved or frustrated. On the one hand, the sudden distance gave me the space I needed to think, to figure out what had really happened between us and whether it had been just a momentary lapse in judgment on both our parts. But on the other hand, the coldness he was displaying felt like rejection. I had seen something in his eyes, something raw, something real. Now, it was as if I had imagined it all. I hated that feeling, hated the doubt that crept in. At work, things were business as usual. Mark still gave me assignments, still checked in on my progress, but there was no more of that easy rapport between us. No more friendly chats or lingering moments after meetings. It was all professional, distant, and efficient. I couldn't help but feel a pang of disappointment every time I saw him walk by, his eyes never meeting mine. A week passed like this. I tried to stay focused, to do my job, but every time I thought about the way he had looked at me, how close he had been to me, how my heart had raced, I couldn't shake the feeling that something important had been left unsaid. I had to know. I couldn't let this quiet tension build between us without confronting it. Finally, after several days of awkward silence, I decided to take the first step. I asked Mark if we could talk privately after work. He agreed, though his response was neutral, almost detached. He said he'd meet me in the conference room at 5:30. That evening, as the office began to empty out, I made my way to the conference room, my heart pounding. What was I even going to say? I hadn't planned it out, but I knew I needed to clear the air. I couldn't let this lingering tension fester any longer. I had to know if he felt the same way, or if I was simply reading too much into his behavior. When he walked in, he didn't seem surprised to see me there. His face was calm, unreadable. He shut the door behind him, his eyes briefly meeting mine before he took a seat across from me. "You wanted to talk?" he asked, his tone professional but cool. I swallowed, trying to steady my nerves. Yes, I paused, searching for the right words. "Mark, I need to know what happened between us. After that day, you've been different, and I can't keep pretending like nothing's changed." He was silent for a moment, his gaze dropping to the table. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, almost hesitant. "I've been thinking about it, too," he said, his words slow, careful. "I've been trying to figure out what to do with everything that's happened." I leaned forward, my heart racing. "So you felt it, too? The tension? The way things felt between us?" Mark looked at me then, his eyes locking onto mine with an intensity one hadn't expected. "I did," he admitted quietly. "I never intended for it to happen. I never meant to cross any lines. But sometimes the connection between two people is undeniable." His words hit me like a wave, both comforting and terrifying at the same time. He wasn't denying it. He wasn't brushing it off. He had felt it too, but that left us in a precarious position. I felt a mix of relief and anxiety. This was the moment of truth. I had asked for this conversation, but now that we were here, I wasn't sure what I wanted from it. "What happens now?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stood up from the table and began pacing slowly across the room. "We have to be careful. What we feel, it complicates things. We both know it." The silence between us grew heavy. The air was thick with unspoken words, with possibilities neither of us could fully embrace or ignore. I wanted to reach out, to pull him back to me, but something stopped me. Was this the point where we chose our careers over our hearts? Or did we risk everything for something we couldn't control? Mark stopped pacing and turned to face me. His eyes softened. "We can't let this affect our work, but I won't pretend it's not there." For the first time in what felt like forever, he was being honest with me, completely open. And that was both a relief and a burden, because now there was no going back. We had acknowledged it, spoken the truth aloud, and there was no telling where that would lead us. Here's an expanded Keynote 500 words, for the story. I thought he only wanted to mentor me, until I saw the way he looked at me. ##### Keynote 5. The moment of no return after that conversation. Everything changed between Mark and me. Not in an obvious way, no dramatic confessions or declarations, but in the way we moved around each other, in the way our interactions became heavy with meaning. The subtle shifts in his gaze, the moments where our eyes locked for a fraction longer than usual, and the careful way we both began to walk around the tension that hung between us. It was undeniable. We couldn't go back to the way things were before. We had crossed the line, and neither of us knew how to undo it. For the next few days, we continued to work together. He was still my mentor, still my boss. He still offered guidance, but now every piece of advice felt laced with something deeper. His presence was always there, lingering just beyond the boundaries of our professional roles, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we were both holding our breath, waiting for the inevitable. It happened one Friday afternoon, right before we were supposed to leave for the weekend. I had stayed late in the office, finishing up the final details on a proposal. I had a million things running through my mind, but I kept finding myself distracted by the memory of our last conversation. The way Mark had looked at me, the way his voice had softened when he spoke, as though he was struggling to find the right words, but also couldn't keep his feelings hidden any longer. As I packed up my things, I was startled by the sound of the office door opening. It was Mark. He had been in a meeting all afternoon, so I hadn't expected him to still be around. "You're still here?" he asked, his tone casual, though I could hear the underlying tension in his voice. He closed the door behind him and leaned against it, studying me from across the room. "Yeah, just finishing up a few things," I replied, my voice sounding a little too shaky. I didn't know why, but whenever he was near now, my pulse quickened. It wasn't just nerves. It was the anticipation, the sense that something was about to happen, that something was happening, whether we acknowledged it or not. He walked closer, taking a seat beside me on the edge of my desk. For a brief moment, we just sat in silence. It was a strange silence, the kind that was too full of meaning to be comfortable. Then he broke it. "You've been on my mind a lot," Mark said, his voice low and steady. I looked up at him, my heart racing. He was so close now, closer than he'd ever been before. I could see the faint lines of weariness around his eyes, but his expression was intense, focused, as though he was waiting for me to respond. "You've been on my mind, too," I whispered, barely able to get the words out. There was the moment we had both been avoiding. There was no more pretending, no more dancing around what was happening between us. Mark looked at me, and this time, the desire in his gaze wasn't hidden. It was raw, unmistakable, and for the first time, I wasn't afraid of it. I wanted it too. I couldn't deny it anymore. Without a word, he reached out, his hand brushing mine. The contact sent a shock of warmth through my body, a spark that I hadn't felt in days. My breath hitched as our fingers tangled together, the connection between us electric and undeniable. "I shouldn't be doing this," he muttered, almost to himself, but his grip tightened slightly, as though he couldn't pull away even if he wanted to. I didn't want him to pull away. I didn't want to pretend anymore. "Neither should I," I said softly, my voice barely above a whisper. There was a pause, and for a moment, neither of us moved. We were trapped in the space between what could be and what shouldn't be. Everything in my body was telling me to step back, to keep things professional, to remember that he was my mentor. But my heart was telling me something else, something louder, something stronger. It was telling me to take the risk, to let go of the rules that had kept me in check for so long. Mark's eyes flickered to my lips, and I could feel the tension in the air, thick and tangible. It was as if the entire world had narrowed down to that one moment. He was so close now, and I could feel his breath on my skin, warm and steady. "I don't know how to fix this," he said, his voice rough. "I don't know if I want to." That confession hung between us like a weight, and in that moment I realized something. There was no fixing it. We had already crossed the line, and there was no going back. We couldn't unfeel what we felt. We couldn't pretend this was just a mentor-mentee relationship anymore. The truth was staring us in the face, and I could see it in his eyes. He was just as caught up in it as I was. "Maybe we're not supposed to fix it," I whispered. In that instant, the world outside the office faded away. There was no more pretending, no more professional boundaries, just the two of us caught in the gravity of everything we had been avoiding. Here's an expanded Keynote 6, 500 words, for the story. I thought he only wanted to mentor me, until I saw the way he looked at me. #####, Keynote 6. The consequences of desire. The days following our moment in the office felt like a blur, like I was living in a world where time had no meaning and everything was suspended in a state of anticipation. Mark and I had crossed a line that neither of us could ignore, but we didn't know what to do with the aftermath. He was still my mentor, my boss. But now everything felt different, complicated. The office, which had once been a place of routine and professionalism, now felt like a battleground, a space filled with unspoken tension and charged glances. We tried to pretend that nothing had changed, that we could go back to business as usual. But I knew that wasn't possible. It wasn't just the stolen moments or lingering touches. It was the weight of what was left unsaid. The truth that hung between us like a wall we could neither break nor scale. I found myself questioning everything, wondering what Mark's intentions truly were. Was this just a fleeting moment for him, or was there something deeper? And what about me? Why couldn't I stop thinking about him? The first time it happened, I knew I couldn't keep pretending. Mark asked me to stay late again, just to go over a few details on a new project. It seemed harmless, professional even, but as soon as I walked into his office, everything about it felt off. The air was thick with tension, and I could feel the invisible line between us grow even more pronounced. He was sitting at his desk, papers scattered in front of him, but his gaze shifted as soon as I entered. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Hey, thanks for staying late," he said, his voice steady, though I could hear the undercurrent of something else there. Something darker. "We just need to wrap up a few things." I nodded, forcing a smile. "Of course." As we worked, the silence between us grew more oppressive. I couldn't concentrate. My mind kept returning to the way his fingers had brushed mine, the way his eyes had locked onto mine the last time we were in the same space. Every word he said seemed to have a double meaning. Every glance felt like a promise. Then, as we reviewed the final details of the project, Mark leaned forward. His arm brushed against mine, sending a jolt of electricity through me. The space between us was too small now. I couldn't focus. I could hardly breathe. "I think we're done here," he said, his voice suddenly quieter, softer. "But we need to talk." I froze, my heart racing. I knew what he was going to say, and I wasn't sure I was ready to hear it. "Talk about what?" He looked at me, and for the first time since that day in the conference room, his gaze was soft, almost apologetic. "About us. About what happened." His words were simple, but the weight behind them was heavy. We couldn't avoid it any longer. The way he was looking at me now was different. There was an intensity to it, a hunger that wasn't there before. It made my heart pound in my chest, and I could feel the room closing in around us. "I'm sorry if I crossed the line," Mark said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I never meant for it to get this complicated, but I can't pretend that I don't feel something for you." I swallowed hard, my thoughts racing. I wanted to say something, but the words were stuck in my throat. I had always admired him, respected him as my mentor. But now, I wasn't sure what I wanted. Did I want to walk away? Was I strong enough to step back from something that had the potential to ruin everything? Or did I want to give in to the pull between us and see where it led? "I don't know what to do anymore," I admitted, my voice shaky. This is all so confusing. I don't know how to handle this." Mark stood up from his desk, taking a step closer to me. "Neither do I," he said quietly. "But I know I don't want to lose this. Whatever this is between us." His words sent a shiver through me. For the first time, I realized how much I had wanted him to say that, how much I had wanted him to admit that we weren't just mentor and mentee anymore. But now that it was out in the open, I felt a rush of fear flood through me. What did it mean for my career? For my future? Could I really risk everything for a relationship that was so complicated, so fraught with danger? "I don't want to lose this, either," I whispered, though I wasn't sure if I meant it. I didn't know if I was ready to give up my career, my identity, for a relationship that had no guarantee, no future. Mark's hand reached for mine, and this time I didn't pull away. He gently squeezed it, his eyes searching mine. "We'll figure it out," he said softly. "Together." The certainty in his voice, the promise, made my heart race, but also made me hesitate. We had crossed the line, and now we were standing on the edge. The consequences of what we were about to do could change everything. And as much as I wanted to believe that we could handle it, part of me was terrified. The question now was, could we really navigate this together, or were we doomed from the start? Here's an expanded Keynote 7, 500 words, for the story. I thought he only wanted to mentor me, until I saw the way he looked at me. ####Keynote 7. The breaking point in the days that followed, Mark and I lived in a limbo, a space where every conversation felt loaded with meaning, and every interaction seemed to hang in the balance between what was professional and what was personal. We were walking a tightrope, and neither of us seemed to have the courage to step off. There was a constant push and pull, a battle between what we should do and what we wanted to do. It was becoming harder to ignore the undercurrent of desire that had taken root between us, and neither of us knew how to put the brakes on it. It was clear that we couldn't keep this up forever. The tension was suffocating, and I could feel it creeping into every aspect of my life. I was distracted at work, unable to concentrate. I was thinking about Mark even when I shouldn't be, during meetings, while driving home, lying in bed at night. He was always there, always in my thoughts like an itch I couldn't scratch. One afternoon, I found myself alone in the office with him again after hours. We were supposed to finish going over a client report, but there was an air of finality between us that neither of us wanted to acknowledge. I couldn't help but notice the way his eyes lingered on me, the way his gaze softened when it landed on my face. There was something so intense about it, something undeniable. He was no longer just my mentor. He was something else, and so was I to him. Are we really going to pretend this is fine? I asked him, my voice shaking, a mix of fear and frustration rising in me. The question had been building for days, but I could no longer keep it inside. We can't keep dancing around this, Mark. His face hardened for a split second, but then softened again. He sighed deeply, running a hand through his hair, clearly struggling with his own emotions. I don't know how we got here, he admitted quietly. I never meant for things to get so complicated, but I can't ignore it anymore, either. I can't pretend I don't want something more with you. My heart skipped a beat, and for a moment, I could barely breathe. I wanted to say something, anything, to make sense of the chaos swirling inside me. But the truth was, I didn't have the answers. I didn't know how we got here either. All I knew was that I couldn't just go back to the way things were before. Not after everything that had passed between us. I took a shaky breath. Neither can I admitted, the truth slipping out of my mouth before I could stop it. But Mark, what does that mean for us? What happens next? What happens to my career? To us? His jaw clenched, and I could see the internal conflict on his face. I knew this wasn't just about us anymore. This wasn't just about the attraction that had sparked between us. It was about everything that would come after, what it would mean for me, for him, for our work relationship. If we crossed this line, there was no going back. I don't know what it means, he said quietly, his voice laced with uncertainty. I wish I could give you an answer. I wish I knew what this was going to look like, but I don't. I know I can't keep pretending like nothing's happening. But the consequences, we both know there are consequences. The words hung heavy between us. Consequences. I had known they were coming, but hearing Mark say it out loud made it real. It wasn't just some hypothetical risk anymore. This was happening, and now we had to face it. I stood up from my seat, my hands trembling. I couldn't sit still, couldn't think straight. So what now? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. What do we do? Do we walk away from this? Or do we take the risk? Mark looked at me for a long time, his eyes searching mine. The weight of the decision was heavy on both of us. He stood, walked over to me, and gently cupped my face in his hands. His touch was tender, but there was a sense of urgency in his movements, as if he was afraid that if we didn't make a choice now, we'd lose the chance forever. I don't know if we can walk away, he said, his voice barely audible. But I know I'm not willing to give up on this, on us. In that moment, everything shifted. The barrier between mentor and mentee, between boss and employee, was gone. We were just two people standing in the middle of a storm, unsure of where it would take us, but knowing we couldn't go back. The risk was terrifying, but the desire was undeniable. I leaned into him, my heart racing, and for the first time in days, I allowed myself to truly feel the pull between us. The consequences would come, yes. There was no denying that. But in this moment, none of that mattered. All that mattered was the way his lips brushed against mine, and the way the world outside the office disappeared entirely.